taking time out. Of your day to come join us for the Advisory Technical Committee. We're kind of trying to start earlier this year so that way we can get everything lined up prior to our 22-23 work plan. So thank you again for taking time out, especially during our lunch hour. We'll go ahead and start with call to order the meeting of the Advisory Technical Committee of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. Today is Tuesday, December 14th. Can I get a roll call, please?
You bet. Bolinas Fire.
Steve Marquette.
Centerfell / Marinwood.
Gardner.
Port of Madera.
Lando present.
County Fire.
Jordan Reeser's here.
Kentfield Fire. Muir Beach.
David Taylor.
How you doing, David? Okay. Novato Fire. Sleepy Hollow.
Mark, I'm here if needed. Rob.
Got it. Thank you. I'll have you down as I believe you're the town of Ross, technically. Thank you, though, Rob. Southern Marin / Mill Valley Fire. Stinson Beach Fire.
Daniel Blair.
Daniel, we'll get the agenda changed next time to get your name represented on this properly. Thank you for stepping in. Appreciate it. Larkspur.
Martin's here.
Thank you. Fairfax. And I have the town of Ross and then town of San Anselmo.
I can cover them all, Mark.
Thanks, Rob. And of the voting members, we do have a quorum. And now let's go to our at-large members. ESP.
Yes, Bell Cole, thank you.
Welcome. County Parks.
Yep, Jim Chaka, present.
Thank you. Marin Water.
Sean Horn, present.
Thanks, Sean. State Parks.
Bree Hardcastle, present.
Thank you, Bree. And rounding it up with National Park Service.
Morning.
Thanks, Greg.
Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. Greg Jones on for both Point Reyes and Golden Gate.
Excellent. And with that, we have all of our at-large members present. Ruben.
Thanks, Mark. I want to take this opportunity to welcome all of our at-large members, which are our partners for both County Open Space, Water District, State Parks, and everyone whose agency I may not remember or recall. So thank you for joining. Your input on our future plans are definitely, how can I say, we look forward to collaborating with you on future projects. So moving on to item number 3, are there any adjustments to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4. This is time for open public expression. The public is welcome to address the Advisory Technical Committee at this time on matters that are not on the agenda and that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to Government Code Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take actions on any matters that are not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Please silence your cell phones during the meeting and mute your microphone when not reporting out. Mark, do we have any members of the public that have any comments?
I'll unmute and then I'll look for any raised hands. And at this time, I see no raised hands.
Perfect. We'll move on to item number 5, which is Planning and Program Managers Report.
Thanks so much. So first of all, I just want to say it's great to participate in my very first ATC meeting. And of course, my first is Planning and Program Manager. So I'm looking forward to this meeting and future meetings. And I want to echo what Chief Martin said, which is a big welcome to our new at-large members. it's a really critical component of making our work more collaborative across Marin County. So thank you so much for taking the time out to be here today. I'm going to keep my comments really brief. I'm going to discuss a little bit about some of the work that the ATC needs to take on in the near future. Of course, there's work plan development, but there's also the matter of electing a chair and vice chair at the first meeting of the next calendar year. So at the January meeting, you guys are going to need to vote for a chair and vice chair. The methods for doing that are outlined in the Joint Exercise Powers Agreement in Article 6, but I'll give you a brief overview. It's done by majority vote. Terms are 1 year in length, and both the chair and vice chair can be re-elected to multiple and/or consecutive terms. The vice chair does not automatically step into the chair position. Generally speaking, we're looking for a balance of expertise between fire expertise and administrative or executive expertise, if possible. The chairperson will preside over these meetings, help staff prepare agendas, work with, attend board meetings, operations committee meetings, sometimes report to the operations committee, and form subcommittees as needed. And there are a few other items in there as well. And of course, the vice chair would step in to take those responsibilities whenever needed. So that's something to consider, maybe agendizing in January. And then there aren't any actions that the ETC needs to take right now at this meeting on that, but something to think about. And we have, I'll cover a few other items. Many of the items that I would discuss are already on the agenda today, and other folks are going to cover them in more detail. But I wanted to mention a few things. As you know, MWPA staff and the board, the executive committee, all of us have been super busy, particularly in the last few months since the ATC met. I'll just hit a few highlights. One is the grant program. So we're in the process of rolling out the grants program for residents to follow up with their defensible space inspections and do some of that home hardening and defensible space work. We're really excited about that process. It's been a long, challenging process to try to design that program, and a big thanks to Charlotte Jourdain, who's been helping immensely, and to many of you who are on this call now, who've really dived in and helped out. And we've been working really closely with many of you on this call to complete environmental compliance for core vegetation management projects. And for this current 21-22 work plan, we've completed environmental compliance for projects totaling around 260 miles of evacuation route roadside vegetation management, 12 miles of fire road improvements, and over 440 acres of shaded fuel breaks and/or goat grazing. And, we're working on permitting for several additional miles of roadside vegetation management in the coastal zone, as many of you know. Several of the other items, again, we'll be covering later on today, the work plan development being one of those key items. And that's it for me, so I'll take any questions.
Not seeing any questions. Thank you, Ann. Much appreciated. We will move on to item number 6, which is our discussion item. So discussion item A is the development of the fiscal year 22-23 work plans and associated project portal. Do we have a presentation on that, or?
Yes. So I'll start us off there, and then I'm going to have Josh Hampshire, our Grizzly Corps fellow, or one of our 2 Grizzly Corps fellows, help with that presentation. So first, I just want to say that we're super excited about developing a new process for building the next year's work plan. We're starting earlier in the process. We're making it more collaborative, and we think easier to do. And a big thanks to Lynn Osgood from Novato who helped prepare the first forms for proposing projects for the work plan. And that was a really big step in the right direction. We've taken her work and kind of cranked it up to 11 and we're creating an online web portal so that member agencies can upload information, project descriptions, GIS information into a database, and then that information can get linked to our goals and objectives and metrics and be in the system, so we're not entering information multiple times. We'll be able to carry over information from year to year, and it'll be a easier process, I think, with a little more work on the front end and a little less work later on down the road. And then it'll be visible to our partners here on this call as well, so that we'll have, it'll make collaboration with our land management agencies and others a lot easier. So with that, I want to invite Josh Hampshire to help present this item. And let's see if I'm sharing the right item. Hold on one moment. Okay, hopefully you can see a presentation here, and I will change the view. How's that?
Looking good.
Great.
So Anne just covered a lot of the background on this web portal, but today's presentation is just going to be a really brief overview of what it's going to look like on your end and how to use it. There's a lot of cool tools that is going to make this web portal really useful for all of us that you won't see today, but with that, we'll get right into it. Here is the login page. We're going to send invites to members of the ATC, all of our member agencies. Each agency can request more than one login so that multiple users within that agency can submit projects and edit those projects. It won't just be one login per agency. Next slide, please. So this is what you see when you log in. This is the home page. It's a map of all the physical site locations. Agencies within similar geographic areas will be able to have edit capacity within that geographic area, and everyone will be able to view the projects in process and submitted all over the JPA. This is still being finalized, and we're making sure that the cooperation component of this is Brown Act compliant. So some details to be finalized there. Next slide. So yeah, this is what your account page is going to look like. It's pretty simple. Don't really need to get too much into that. Here is where the fun starts. So this is the project database where all the projects in process, submitted in past years, and approved for the current work plan will live. These right here are just some placeholder projects that we've been using in developing the portal. So nothing that you need to worry about, but let's see. It'll store projects year to year, so agencies will have the capacity to either edit and resubmit or copy and paste project details for the resubmission of projects that require maintenance. And we've also developed a numbering system to help track projects, which will be included in this page. So for the purpose of this walkthrough, I chose a project from the current year's work plan and reapplied through the web portal. This one was chosen simply because it was higher in the 1,056 page work plan, and I was tired of scrolling. Why we need a web portal and a project database. So we've got the Novato roadside evacuation route. This is just the basic info section. So the lead agency, any supporting agencies, the zone that it's in, whether it's core, local, or defensible space. And then this vegetation management is the goal, and that's a pretty important component of this. Choosing the goal guides the rest of the application process. So you can see along the top, there's all these tabs: vegetation management, detection, notification, evacuation. These are all different goals and a different set of questions based on the goal that you choose on this first page. Next slide. So yeah, you can see that drop down right there, the 5 goals. Next slide. So yeah, just some more basic info questions. We can keep moving through this. Fire hazard severity zone. This is all very similar stuff from previous work plans, just a little bit easier to work through. And then here's the project map. So this is one of my favorite components of the web portal. Rather than getting all sorts of different pictures and files of maps created with different software, we've created the capacity to draw your own polygons and your lines within the application process. And it's really simple. In a couple slides, I'll show you what that looks like after you draw those polygons and lines. And then if you do have a more in-depth KML file developed with GIS software, then you can upload that here instead, or you can do both. On this next slide, I'll show you kind of an example of what it used to look like in the work plan. And these maps are really useful to the individual agencies, but built into our work plan, it doesn't allow other people who are interfacing with that work plan to really explore the project areas very well. So here's what it looks like after you draw those polygons. A lot easier than using actual GIS software if you don't have the capacity in your organization. The list of tools is in the top right there. So you got your polygon builder, your line drawer, point dropper, and then you can edit all those. Next slide. So now we're into the more detailed questions on vegetation management. I chose a veg management project because there's 3 categories of veg management projects that we'll have in the work plan: planning, implementation, and maintenance of a previously approved MWPA funded project. So maintenance of a previously approved MWPA project will be able to, copy and paste or repopulate all the information from a past project from that database that we showed earlier. I think we can move to the next slide. Oh, and another thing I wanted to say is that all of these questions here are still from the previous worksheets. We might change the verbiage around a little bit, but this is pretty much the same thing that you have been seeing in the last couple of years. All right, we can move through it. So yeah, here's the different section for maintenance of a previously approved MWPA funded project. And so now I'm just kind of copying and pasting all of the answers that were given in this current year's work plan into the questions. And we can scroll through just so you can see what that looks like, but there's nothing special. And then this bottom section is, it'll ask you, does the project include any physical disturbance? Yes or no. If you answer no, you don't have to deal with the CEQA stuff. But in vegetation management, the answer will often be yes. And we just want our agencies to provide as much information that they already know here. We'll also be, our consultants will let us know additional information as needed on these questions, but as much as you can helps. And that's it for the walkthrough. These are some of the items that Anne mentioned, and if there's anything more to be said on them, I'll turn it back over to her. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Josh. Yeah, we're really excited about this tool because we think it's going to save a lot of time. It's going to make it so much easier to collaborate, and we are committed to, it's not ready yet, but we're going to start, populating it with test projects, and we've started that already, but work with you on some potential projects that you might want to submit. We'll probably unveil this in or be closer to that kind of beta testing phase in January after the new year. And we think that as part of this process, we'll probably want to ramp up the frequency of meetings for the ATC to, at least January, maybe monthly, if that works for everyone. We foresee continuing this process of project development, proposal development through the spring. The work plan needs to be adopted by June 1st. And so that means really working a lot on it in, January, February, March, into April. Operations will need to provide recommendations, a recommendation to the board. And the operations committee should also determine strategy and timing, as well as the different roles and responsibilities for the ATC versus, versus the ops committee for work plan development. And they could be working on that as soon as January. So that's where we are. We think it's going to be a good process. We're excited to hear your feedback and your thoughts and start testing it out with you all as we start brainstorming on what projects should be included in the 2022-2023 work plan.
Thank you, Ann. Questions from the group?
Hi,
Bell?
yeah, I'm new to this, but the question I have looks so good, I'm curious about you mentioned the timing. Each month, January, February, March, you'll have different projects in here. When does it become available? Is this going on a public webpage? Is this going to be available? When does it get available to the public? And also, or groups that some of us would like to share it with?
I think that during the development process, it makes sense for this to be seen by the ATC and operations and those who are really building it. And it'll be visible to all of our ATC members, and that includes you, Belle.
Yeah.
Kind of that's our recommendation at this point. Mark, if you want to add anything to that, feel free.
Well, as projects become more well refined, then getting to the point of going to the operations committee as a packet for their recommendation for approval, that's when it would be fully vetted to the public. But until that point it'll be within the group that is working on the projects.
Okay.
So timeline wise, what I'm hearing is we'll meet monthly, and hopefully by April-ish, we should have a rough draft of what our work plans are. And then hopefully be able to present that to the ops committee sometime late April, early May. So that way they have a time to review it. We make any edits, and that way it can be presented to the board prior to June for adoption. Is that kind of about the right timeline?
Yes.
Perfect. Any other questions from the group regarding the program or anything that we saw on it? I know this
Quinn
was
has
kind of
her hand raised.
who does?
Quinn.
Okay, Quinn.
Conceptually, I love the idea. I think it's a great way to consolidate stuff and sort things. A couple of questions. One, and maybe to Belle's point, is once this is approved by the board, is there a public interface, and is it the map where they can then click on the map, and then do they pull up every detail of the project, or is it consolidate, or is that kind of still to be figured out?
I think it'll be public to the same extent that it was public last time around, where there was a document available online, so folks could dig into what was proposed. So we could discuss if there's, I think in terms of environmental compliance, that process would not have started in any great detail. So so that would not be public. It would just be, kind of an estimate of, is environmental compliance needed or not? But we can discuss further if you have any concerns.
Well, and to follow up on that, if I can, and the way the current our new website is built, and you can pull up projects based on the goal that they're affiliated to, or you could pull up projects based on a zone. Once the work plan is approved, then they would all be shown in those portions of the website, easily accessible to the public.
Okay, so the mapping tool we're seeing is an internal function, but it'll be mimicked at a public way that's even a little bit more cleaned up. Awesome.
Yeah.
Question about budget. Now we went through the screens pretty quickly, but I didn't see a ton on input budget or how to estimate that. So the question is, how does the budget go into the tool? And then the second question is more big picture, and in terms of, do we know at this point if the planning process for next year's work plan is going to be allocated the same way it was last year, or if it'll be a more competitive prioritization process?
It'll be very similar to last year. How the process will work is that I'll start meeting with Lisa Schiffman, our finance director, here real soon, determine the operating costs that are operational operating costs that we need to carve out from the beginning, and then create what that threshold is for the total bucket of core projects, and then using the percentages for the 5 geographical regions, give each regional their benchmark that they should shoot for. Should be very similar.
Okay, great, thanks. And then more probably on the technical side, projects that span multiple zones, and maybe it's just a comment that as you're considering editing rights, just kind of figuring out whether that just means one zone needs to take ownership of that project, or if there's the ability to have projects that span zones edited in 2 ways. And then I can see the kind of the way the vegetation management tab with the planning, implementation, maintenance question. I can see a lot of projects spanning 2 or more of those. So maybe checks boxes rather than radials or something that allows that information. Because I could see, especially over a year, yeah, my first 3 months of this project are planning, but I intend to implement it before the end of the fiscal year, et cetera. Or clear direction on how you want us to use those if they have to stay in that radial. But overall, I think it'll be really helpful, and appreciate the efforts. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to respond to some of that, absolutely, we've been thinking about how to accommodate projects that have multiple partners and include kind of drop-down menus where you can check multiple partner member agencies or others. And then we wanted to create space for projects that maybe went through the planning phase in a previous fiscal year and are now on to implementation, but implementation didn't happen during that previous fiscal year, et cetera. So thank you for those comments, and we'll continue trying to plan for that.
Any other questions, comments regarding the new possible program?
I see Jen.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly. With the goal, it sounds like the goal is to start having and hearing potential project submissions in this forum in April. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's so the way the process works is we start coming up with basically timelines of what projects are, and then start making recommendations, or hopefully the individual member agencies are already reaching out to their partners on where they propose the projects to occur. Like for example, if they're doing something or proposing something on open space, hopefully those conversations are already happening or have already happened prior to being implemented into the work plan.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was headed with that, Ruben. It was just to reiterate, and I think those conversations are largely happening with Marin County Parks, but maybe this is helpful feedback for all land managers, just that those conversations should start early. You know, I mean, now I think is a great time to start January, so that each of us have the chance to work with our stakeholders and have those conversations prior to, you know, those concepts being launched in a TAC meeting or any other MWPA meeting. So yeah, early engagement is very helpful.
Yeah, and that's the intent of this, is with you guys as part of our being part of the at-large membership, is you guys are our neighbors and stakeholders within fuels reduction projects, and it surrounds all of our communities. And so the goal was to have you here because most of the work, or a lot of the work that's being proposed, is actually on your land. And so trying to have that engagement and collaboration early on, I think is going to make every project more successful. I think it'll make the MWPA successful, and then also make your own work plans that you may already have in place, either enhance them, or, you know, we can then collaborate and, you know, make our dollars go farther.
That sounds great. Thanks, Ruben.
The other component of this process that I think is going to be helpful is that internal map, so that land managers can catch anything, you know, that looks like it might overlap your property or be adjacent to, and you just haven't heard anything about it yet. At least you'll be aware, and you can contact the folks involved and really start that conversation if you're not already contacted on that.
Thanks, Ann. Any further questions regarding the program?
Hey, Ruben, this is Jordan. Can I add?
Hey, Jordan.
I don't know if this is the, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. We can bring it up later. I don't know if we're gonna talk about compliance, but just thinking about, especially with our cooperating agencies and land management entities, et cetera, just as far as the compliance piece on as it relates to this. I have a few questions, and maybe you're gonna be for the board or for the operations group, but you know, we've had a couple of situations, you know, where there's duplicity and overlap, and what I feel like maybe is a little extra effort where it doesn't need to apply from the compliance piece on doing, you know, work on either if it's open space or state parks or National Park Service land, right? Where there's existing compliance in place, or those agencies are responsible for the compliance for the work on their land. And that I understand why the MWPA has decided to engage on some of the, you know, because of the funding reality, but just some clarification up front for the process, especially those that are going to be putting in projects, because it can, you know, just add when we add another level or a second notice of exemption to be filed for the same project, it can just, you know, delay things out. It can create some complications. So I think just have a question on that. And I don't know if it's a question or just a comment.
I think what we need to do, Jordan, on this one is probably put it onto our January agenda. So as a discussion item.
Yeah.
I know where you're going with this, and I agree on the duplicity. However, I don't think it's something that we can talk about. Is that correct, Mark?
Yeah, since it's not agendized, it's not something we really should be diving into.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll put that, Jordan, on the January agenda. So that way we can dive deep into it. So that way we can try to figure out what roles and responsibilities are for either the land manager or MWPA.
Yeah, great. And Ruben, I don't know if that's our discussion. I mean, we're not expertise in this. This might go above, you know, that maybe my comment was to bring it up at a higher level to see if it's something they might discuss on a future agenda, and they could just push down direction to us. I don't think this is an area that we should be kind of delving into as far as compliance.
Yeah, I agree, but let's put it on the January agenda. That way we can get into a full discussion. That way we know what our guardrails are. Okay, so we will move on to item B, which is.
We should hit public comment first. Ruben.
Okay. Do we have any public comments for item 6A?
We do. And Larry Minikis, you can unmute and go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. A very good presentation. And following up with what Quinn and Ann were discussing, my question is, those with sign-in privileges will have the ability, if I understand correctly, to edit the document or comment on the document. Are there going to be tracking features built in so you know who is making the comment and when, so that you can easily follow changes to the document? Thank you.
I can address that. That is something that we've discussed to track who is making edits and where. And our member agencies will have both viewing and editing privileges, and our partner agency members of the ATC will have viewing ability.
Okay, thank you, Ann. Do we have any other public comments?
Looking for any further raised hands? And no more raised hands.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the board. Then we'll move on to item 6B, the strategic ad hoc subcommittee update. Do we have a presentation on that?
We do, and I'll be giving that to you guys as soon as I get my screen share working. And if you can just give me a thumbs up that you're seeing my full slide and not my presenter view, perfect. So just as a little bit of background, the board created a strategic planning ad hoc subcommittee, and it really was looking at what are our greatest strengths, what are our weaknesses, what are some opportunities, and what are our threats, right? The typical SWOT. And one of the biggest threats that we saw to the MWPA right now is not being able to accomplish the items that we put into our work plan in an efficient manner and actually spending the funds that we should be spending on vegetation management. This is, you know, you guys know how much work everybody has been putting in for the year and a half. You've heard it from me multiple times. You're going to continue to hear it from me. The strength of the MWPA is its member agencies. You guys know better than I do, all of the work that was displayed in our annual report was done by our member agencies, was not done by the MWPA. And so I want to acknowledge that, and also acknowledge, I could tell by looking at you, talking to you, listening to you, that it's paid a toll on a lot of our member agencies. So here's what we've accomplished into that year and a half. And as you can see, the project completion has turned to be fairly challenging. So how do we improve our implementation? Well, there's basically three options, with option 3 having a 3A and a 3B. Option 1 is stick with our current approach. And that is that our member agencies absorb the extra workload that is coming to them. And for some of the agencies, it might be $40,000, $50,000 worth of projects. For other member agencies, it may be $1 to $2 million worth of projects, if not more. And that is a substantial workload. And some of our more well-staffed agencies have been able to absorb that to a degree, but they have paid the price in doing that. But our smaller agencies really can't absorb that. Option 2 would be to use MWPA funding to increase the internal bandwidth. Again, some of our member agencies that are receiving more funds can do that. They can increase their internal staffing, and they can manage their core projects as well as their local mitigation projects. But again, the smaller agencies would not be able to they don't have enough money to be able to increase that bandwidth. There could be shared resources across different member agencies, but quite frankly, that's what the MWPA was supposed to be formed, is to create that shared work effort. So we get into options 3A and 3B, and normally I'm a big fan of decentralization of work, unless there can be increased efficiencies through centralizing the work. And I do think there's an opportunity to centralize the work. 3A is complete centralization. And that would be that all core projects are managed and implemented by the MWPA. Our recommendation from the Strategic Ad Hoc Subcommittee, however, is option 3B, that still allows member agencies to have the flexibility. If they choose to implement their core projects, then absolutely they can. Let me give you just a couple of examples of how things are going right now. And I'll use, I see Quinn on my screen right now, and I'll use Santa Fe as an example, and Kate Anderson specifically. They put together a very large suite of core projects. And the MWPA, after the work plan was approved, completed the compliance on that through our partnership with Panorama. And then we kick it back to Kate and say, Kate, it's ready to go. Kate goes through Santa Fe city procurement process, secures a contractor, awards the contract, goes out and does the initial meetings with the contractor to make sure they understand the scope, goes in and makes sure that they're doing their job as appropriate, and then closes it out, receives an invoice from the contractor, pays the invoice through the Santa Fe procurement process, turns around and invoices the MWPA for reimbursement of those funds. Not exactly the most efficient way to get some of that work done. And now if we take it a step further, I'm looking at Ruben and Todd Lando right now. They've been doing very much the same thing for their projects. But let's look at next work plan, where we are looking at the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break that's going to be spanning 9 different agencies across the entire Ross Valley. Who would own doing that work? Would Corte Madera own that project and then potentially be funding work that's going to be happening in Fairfax? And so if you multiply what Santa Fe has been going through, under option one and translate that into next year, it can get really cumbersome. And then we lose out on efficiencies on having people who are subject matter experts in that type of work. Plus, we are looking at being able to create a vendor list within the MWPA that would be available so that if we have a list of people that can do evacuation route clearing, and then we have a large 5 evacuation route clearing projects, we can have call up vendor A, are you available for this project? Yes. Create, and then call vendor B for another project. And if we start showing we have so much work, we're going to have vendors that start scheduling time and making sure that they are available for work within the MWPA because they know that we will provide a steady stream of employment for them. Just a little quick table of who is doing things now and how we are proposing to do things under proposal 3B. And I just will go really for the sake of time to where the 4 green boxes are. The fund management and reporting right now, MWPA is contributing to that, like I mentioned in the Santa Fe process, and Santa Fe is really owning it. In the future, we can look to have MWPA managing the funding of that project and not having to have that duplicative process of being invoiced. And then the member agency would contribute to that process. And again, with the core project implementation, having that person that can work with the contractor day in and day out, making sure that they are meeting our requirements. If they hit any snags, they have some questions about the project, they can come to the MWPA with contribution from our member agencies. So in order to do that, looking at our organizational structure, we are making some recommendations for additional staff. And that would be, one of them is to create a vegetation management specialist position and have 2 people in that spot. One of those positions would be actually bringing chipper days from Fire Safe Marin into the MWPA. Fire Safe Marin really wants to stay in the public education realm, and they were only doing the chipper day management because we didn't have the bandwidth to do it. The good thing about that position is already funded and the allocations are already there. There would be no net increase for cost for the MWPA for that position. Then the second position would be that person that I use, Kate Anderson as the example. That would be the person that is working with our contractors, making sure that they're all lined out appropriately. The wildfire mitigation specialist lead and the wildfire mitigation specialist, it doesn't say if needed on this page. In a future page, it will say if needed, but these are if needed positions, because quite frankly, the way the MWPA was designed was that we were supposed to be doing these inspections for the member agencies, and the member agencies technically opt out of that program. Once a year, I'm supposed to receive a letter from the member agency saying they're opting out of the program. Well, if that's the case, we need to have those positions created within the MWPA should an agency decide they want to opt out of doing their inspections. And so we want to create those position descriptions, have them available. We wouldn't necessarily fill them right away. Administrative analyst, I can promise you that Ann and I are completely buried with the administrative work, and we're struggling to keep up. In fact, arguably not keeping up. So we would like to bring an administrative analyst in. That person would be funded from our administrative budget. Out of all these positions, that would be the only position that's funded out of the administrative budget. And this person would be the person that helps to establish that vendor list that I talked to you about. So under the world of 3B, that the Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break project, we would get the compliance done through our contract with Panorama. The veg management specialist would be given the go-ahead to start implementing phases of that project, identify the types of vendors that we would need here or there, and then go to the administrative analyst who would say, all right, these are your vendors you can offer these jobs to. And then the grant specialist, twofold in that person. I think it would be a half-time person under contract, and that would be to manage our outgoing grants, as well as being the person that's managing all the paperwork of receiving grants. And those of you who have gone through the grant process, you know how much work there is to keep the documentation of grants so that if you get audited, you're not kicking money back. This table here just shows how we can scale it and we can be flexible within the member agencies. Perhaps Santa Fe decides, you know what, we'll handle about 50% of our core projects and go the route that we have been going, but we want MWPA to handle the other 50. Nevada's been very upfront. They would like to continue to manage their core projects. So, but I have MWPA listed as 10% because there's still chipper days, there's still public education. So 10% of that core really falls within MWPA's management. So this slide just kind of shows you the scalability of it. And here's where we have some brief position descriptions, and they are listed in the order that we're recommending hiring in priority in case the board wants to be able to scale this. And here's where you see the WIMS lead and the WIMS themselves would be if needed positions. And so at the board meeting on Thursday, we'll be asking them to direct staff to create position descriptions, perform salary surveys so we can make sure that the salary range we are looking is competitive, but also not overbuilt. And then if we're going to start bringing in employees, we need to make much better human resources policies than we currently have, which are virtually none. So in order to get us to that point to be able to build those packages, we would look at a 20-hour-a-week contract human resource specialists from regional government services to help with the position descriptions, salary surveys, and policy development. We're also looking to have a similar contract for an administrative analyst from regional government services to start picking up some of the day-to-day administrative functions that Ann and I have been conducting so that we can start focusing at the more strategic level. And with that, I'll stop the screen share and open up to any questions, comments.
Hey, Mark, I guess I'll go first. So I think the 3B option is a great one. I think that hybrid model, we've seen it work pretty well in the D space side of things, and I think it makes a lot of sense here. I think that for me personally, and certainly could dive more into kind of the San Rafael Marinwood specifics, I see a lot of value in a centralized contracting process through the MWPA, but still using our local resources to do a lot more of the on the ground project management, contractor management once they're there and type of thing. I would be a little bit concerned about kind of totally pushing all core projects into the core, just based when we get resident feedback, right? Like they want us to know what the answer is and they want us to have some level of control over it. And so I think as much as we can keep local while also not duplicating and for all the benefits you mentioned. I do think the I know I said this to you offline a couple weeks ago, but I think the grant specialist is a full-time position. So I'll just put my support out for that. I think that's going to be a big lift and would encourage consideration of looking at that more as a half position. So, but overall, I think the 3B, especially for some of the smaller agencies, it makes a ton of sense. And those blended projects, especially, I think when we're working really in our zone, it's easy. But as we get to these bigger blended projects, it's going to be super helpful. So thank you for the report.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Fred with Southern Marina. I think that first I apologize. I'm late to the meeting. I had a BC test that we were doing over here. But I think that I agree. I think that 3B looks really good. I think that we just need to make sure that, like Quinn was saying, we need to make sure that when the public comes to us directly, we are very well informed as to what is happening. And I'm sure that, that's just a communications issue that can be worked out for sure. One of the biggest hurdles that we have right now is just overall staffing for all the projects that are going on. Even though we have a bigger staff, we also were, prior to MWPA, we were already at capacity with local projects. So having this, the ability to add more staff to MWPA, yes, for sure. And grant full-time, yes, for sure. If we can make that happen, because it is a big lift. And we're very fortunate locally here that we have a gentleman who's been very good about helping us with grants, but you can talk to Jim Casper. He'll tell you it is a full-time job for sure. So kudos to you and looking forward to the future. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Hey, Ruben, this is Jordan. For clarification, the grants position, is that for dispersing the MWPA grants or to be looking for grant opportunities to support MWPA funds partnering?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in support of definitely MWPA increasing your staff level. The question always comes up is MWPA a funding source or a project implementation agency? And I view it as kind of a little bit of both, depending on what the projects are. And definitely, once we start getting to the larger shaded fuel breaks and major core projects, a lot of us smaller agencies may struggle to get full capacity and to be able to manage that and keep up what we're already doing now. So definitely I'm in support of you getting up staffing. On the grant side of it, I definitely agree. I've never been a big grant manager per se, because that's not my forte, but I definitely respect what those individuals do and definitely understand the complexities that are involved, both asking for grants and the complexity in managing them. Just from hearing from some of my colleagues that do it already. So I definitely would recommend possibly seeing that full-time position. And we're here to support you, Mark and Ann, in whatever way we can as member agencies. And with that,
We do have a couple raised hands from David
Okay.
Taylor and Sean Horn.
okay,
Yeah,
David.
I think that option 3B makes a lot of sense. And I just was, the slide you showed, Mark, with the sort of allocations for Southern Marin was 50-50. And then we're a tiny agency within the Southern Marin zone. And I know, and we've had these conversations about how much help we need with implementation and organization. And so do we have a separate, I mean, it's sort of, I know,
It would be within the whole core zone, but those values I put in there were completely abstract and as an example. I should have clarified that. Thank you.
Sean?
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate the presentation. I think you're on the right track trying to scale up in your staffing to try to implement MWPA's mission accordingly. I would suggest that with the vegetation management specialist, you consider adding some compliance technical capacity to help you with implementing your work in a way that meets all of the CEQA measures that you're going to be charged with implementing. So just a suggestion there and expanding that.
That's a great suggestion. I would imagine you have a little support or a little history in that yourself. So thank you.
Any more comments, questions from the ATC?
Sorry,
Glenn?
one other question. You mentioned that I think the admin analyst would be the only position that was funded out of the admin bucket. Can you talk a little bit about the funding for those others? And then would some of the kind of 3B would create this very hybrid model? Would the funding also then be hybrid in terms of how it was coming out, or would it be attached to specific core projects? Or can you just talk a little more about that?
The veg management specialist would come out of the operational budget, and that would be most likely a carve out at the top prior to us finding out how much or determining how much is going to go towards the core budgeting. The grant specialist, I feel that we could build that into the grant program, as well as building in admin fees for the grants that we receive to fund that position.
Bill, you had a question?
Yeah. So in terms of the job descriptions, the qualifications for, say, the veg management specialist, how are they going to be determined? And the level, have you already figured out what level of person you're looking for and what kind of both education and experience they're going to need and how well they'll fit in with the districts that they're going to be dealing with? I mean, I'm just curious as to how you're dealing with that issue.
That'll be part of bringing on that human resources specialist as we build the position descriptions and finding like positions and mostly land management agencies probably to beg, borrow, and steal their position descriptions.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none. Mark, let's go ahead and see if we have any comments from the public.
And I'm looking for any raised hands and kind of pausing a little bit, and I see no raised hands.
Okay, seeing no hands raised, we'll go ahead and bring it back to the group. Thanks, everyone. Good presentation. We look forward to you actually getting some help and some staff. We definitely understand what it's like wearing multiple hats. We've all done it at one point or another within our careers, or some of us still do.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to item 6C, which is ecological sound practices, the document update. Do we have a presentation?
There, I'll give that presentation. I don't have a PowerPoint. This will be a brief update, and we do have a member of the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership here with us today who can help answer some questions, I think, if she doesn't mind. So very briefly, back when the MWPA was being formed, a group of environmental organizations was asked to provide recommendations for ecologically sound practices that could be incorporated into MWPA's work. And that partnership became the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership. And Belle Cole represents that group today. And that group has provided draft practices for us to consider. And so before I go on, I just want to quickly express our appreciation for their hard work, working with a lot of different stakeholders to come up with draft best practices related to vegetation management and defensible space and carbon management. And just thank you, Belle, and to your team for all of your hard work. MWPA took that draft document and reviewed it along with our environmental consultants, our legal counsel, and others to consider, among other things, consistency with Measure C, consistency with environmental compliance activities and laws and regulations, and feasibility as well. Overall, I think we agree on a lot, so that's really exciting. And we did have some edits that we shared with ESP in the last few weeks. We've had several meetings actually to discuss and kind of chat back and forth. And ESP is actually going to be considering an updated draft at their meeting today. And at some point in the near future, we'll provide a more up-to-date draft of that document. And so in terms of process and next steps, once we have our hands on that next document, the ATC will get involved. The overall process that was set forth early on was for the ATC to consider that document, review it in detail, then move on to the Ops Committee, provide recommendations to the Ops Committee, and then it goes to the board for consideration. And so our recommendation is that the Chief Martin, you create an ad hoc subcommittee sometime in the near future to receive that document and review it in detail and provide edits and comments and recommendations on that. And with that, that's it for me. I'll take questions.
Any questions from the group? I had one in regards to the ad hoc committee.
If we need to.
Does that need to occur at a publicly held meeting when the members are selected, or can it be done on the side as looking out for people or recruiting people, I should say?
My understanding is that it can happen outside. It can be created. It doesn't have to happen in this forum, in this public meeting now, but you can create a team to review the document in more detail, and then we can bring it back to an ATC meeting in the future.
And then my understanding is the only parameters we have is we cannot have a quorum, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Just want to know where the guardrails are.
Okay.
So what I'll end up doing is I will forward an email out to the ATC committee and to see if I can have any volunteers or members who are interested in being part of that ad hoc committee. And then part of that ad hoc committee, and is it just within ATC voting members, or can we also have members that are at large?
Let me ask Mark on that.
I see no reason not to include the at-large members. I think it would be valuable input to provide. Is one of the reasons why we would like to have them on.
Yeah. I'm just looking at it as a subject matter experts.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So any questions regarding that? Okay, seeing none, do we have any members of the public that would like to comment on it?
And I'm looking for any raised hands. And do not see any.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the group. Now we're moving to item number 7, and 7A is the objectives and metrics updates. Do we have a presentation?
Yes, good afternoon, Advisory and Tech Committee. I will be, my name is Charlotte Jourdain. I'll be presenting you this item. Let me just share my screen, one moment. Can everybody see that?
You're up.
Okay, great. So thank you very much. So as outlined in the staff report, I'm just going to essentially recap what's in the staff report briefly, but the item before you today is to approve the objectives that were outlined for MWPA and provide feedback on the metrics. So just to clarify, this is for organization wide, so MWPA wide. What are the objectives and how do we want to measure progress towards these objectives? I've consulted with several of you on the call, and I probably should start by thanking you all for your input on this. We held, I think, 4 or 5 workshop style meetings on this. One of the things that we decided early on to adopt is a methodology to make sure that we were building objectives based on both projects that we are already doing and also projects that we want to do, right? So what we used are strategic documents, including the CWPP, MWPA mission statement, the 2 previously approved work plans. We also used outside resources like the Fire Adapted Community Self-Assessment Test, and of course, all of the member agencies' experience, knowledge, and leadership, common sense, and research to outline for each goal previously approved by the board, what are the objectives that we want to pursue, and essentially how the projects that we've done in the past map to these objectives as a way to make sure that we're not missing out on potential objectives. So I wanted to also go back to the first presentation of today's meeting regarding the development of the work plan. So as it was mentioned during that presentation, for the next work plans starting with the process in January, all projects that are submitted will be requested to select a goal and an objective. And essentially, just like the work plan platform will become a working tool for the development of the work plan, we also envision that that database will have a different cut to it that will provide a dashboard for these objectives and progress towards them as measured. So just to clarify, there's a desire for consistency in how we measure progress towards each objective, which is why we envision, but this is up to your comments and feedback, that project submissions will be required to select appropriate measures of how they foresee their project could be best measured for progress. I'll outline in the presentation, but you have received this in your staff report as well, that we foresee 2 different types of metrics. The first one is what I'm referring to as a risk reduction measures. So those are essentially the most interesting measures. They truly measure how the work of MWPA member agencies go towards reducing the risk on all of our goals, risk towards wildfires. And then also in terms of accountability, and because sometimes it's just not that easy or possible to measure risk reduction, we also need to request project outcome indicators for the projects that are submitted and approved through the work plan. I'll outline that we have 2 very important tools to look at risk reduction. One of them is the CWPP, and the other one is a project for which MWPA is in procurement. It's an evacuation risk assessment for all of the JPA at the road segment level. That was essential. That is going to essentially identify risk scores when it comes to an evacuation. Finally, we also have data from the DSI platform for parcel inspections both defensible space and home hardening. That will provide a lot of interesting data. But when we consider measures and indicators, I just want to remind everyone that the most important ones are the ones that really help us build better projects. So essentially benchmark data is what we're looking for, particularly in the case of MWPA, that's a relatively new agency that is moving the needle in terms of fire prevention. I think it's really important that we look at what benchmark data we have and how it informs how we should build our projects and our programs in the future. So I'll move on a little bit quickly through my slides because some of them are there to respond to any questions. But essentially, to provide you with a visual, the first goal approved by the board is the goal of vegetation management. And under this goal, we have the working group has outlined 4 objectives for which there are already projects underway for each of the zone and sometimes also at the JPA-wide level. So they are outlined in the in this slide and on the document you've received. I don't think I should spend the time going line by line, so I'll move on to the next goal and we can come back to it if there's questions. So the second goal is detection, alert, and evacuation. And there is, I believe, 8 different objectives that were identified. The first one concerns detection, the second one concerns alerting, and the rest of them concern evacuation. And although we have some projects already either proposed or underway for this goal, there's a lot more unknown as far as how we want to measure progress, because we don't always know what the projects are going to be towards these objectives. And this is where that evacuation risk assessment I mentioned might come into play and be helpful in identifying how we can measure progress. I'll move on to goal number 3, residence grants. It was mentioned, Anne mentioned during her update that we have now officially, as of Monday, opened the MWPA residence grant program. So that's just to clarify, it's funding that goes from MWPA directly to residents to make changes to their parcels when it comes to defensible space and home hardening. The good news on this goal is that all member agencies have agreed to use the DSI app, and therefore the burden of reporting on the agency will be fairly limited, if any, because we can centrally obtain data from the platform we have in place to report on what people are using the grants for, how grants are serving to reduce issues at the parcel level, what kind of issues people are applying for, which will help us create new grant programs that meet the needs of the community, and so on. The goal number 4 is public outreach and education. Again, 4 objectives on this one. Some projects already underway, but there is a desire to go more in depth and to commission or to request what I will call a knowledge and attitudes sort of market research type of survey that would provide a lot of benchmark data on what we need to do to increase the chances that our community goes from knowing about wildfire prevention to actually taking action towards preparing for it. So again, there we might be missing some potential details on the projects we want to include and how we measure progress towards these objectives. And then finally, the last goal is the DSpace and home hardening goal, for which we have 3 objectives. Very simple: reduce structural ignitability, create and maintain adequate defensible space, and provide best practices on fire adapted structural DSpace code and code enforcement. So again, there we do have evaluation. All of our agencies are, of course, already inspecting and providing evaluations. And again, on this one, there might be the opportunity to centralize data and reporting. But essentially, the question before you today is, approve the objectives and then think about how you want to provide reporting on the projects that you submit for the next work plan. So the suggestion is to have at least some indicators to select from. I do think that we need to leave a text box or the ability for agencies to submit other types of measures that they feel are appropriate, simply because, like I said, for some of these goals and objectives, we do not know what the projects are going to be, and therefore it's very difficult to conceptualize what and how we can measure progress. I think I'll pause there and take any questions on the objectives.
All right, do we have any questions for Charlotte regarding what we've covered so far?
Okay.
Don't be shy.
I'll just keep going.
This is your time. Keep going.
Sorry, did I see, is there a comment or no? No comment. Okay, so I'll just go back a little bit more in depth. I gave you an overview of the objectives under each of the goals. I do want to go back to the measures, you can call them measures, indicators, metrics, whichever way. What are we measuring to show progress towards these objectives? So I want to go back to goal number 1 and give you an overview a little bit more detailed. So on vegetation management, on our vegetation management goals, we have 4 objectives, essentially geographically, the area between wildlands and neighborhoods, in the wildlands, fire roads, and then evacuation roads. Those are the way the working group has sort of delimited the objectives. So when we think about risk reduction, we basically for this goal have, like I said, 2 very important tools that can help us measure whether our actions, as determined by the projects that the work plan approves, can lead to reduced risk. The first is the CWPP, which provides parcel level risk score. And the second is the evacuation risk assessment, which will provide, again, it's not yet, it's still in procurement, and it's going to be a while before that project is completed, will provide a risk segment score. So, one of the things I think we need to consider here is the CWPP only gets updated every 4 or 5 years. So that's not very frequent when we're looking at measuring risk reduction. It does provide top of the line, data-driven, absolutely incredible data when it comes to what we're trying to measure here. So, it's which do you choose? More frequent, but perhaps less accurate, less impact related data, or something else. So that's where the project indicators come in. I think we can still, without always knowing what the risk reduction is by the semester or trimester or months or whatever the time increment is, we can still request that member agencies, as they submit projects, provide updates on things like the volume of vegetation that is removed, the number of acres that are treated or maintained, the type of vegetation that they plan or have removed, and also obviously the location of the project in relation to the severity of fire hazard. So that's where I think this is a pretty good illustration of how project outcomes can complement and provide a step in for what the ultimate goal is, which is more looking at risk reduction. You have the list before you, and I look forward to hearing any thoughts. I'm going to give the exact same presentation to the operations committee tomorrow, and then we're planning on going to the board in January with this. So there's still time to make changes. On the detection, alert, and evacuation metrics. So for detection and alert, I think there's the desire to understand how the systems in place are being used by the public, by residents, by visitors, by agencies as they detect and monitor fires. So these are more, usability, how appropriate, how helpful are the systems in place. The other objectives that have to do with actual evacuations, again, we're going back to that risk score at the road segment level. We're also going to look at benchmark data from the survey I mentioned on attitudes and knowledge of our community in terms of, are they prepared to evacuate? Do they know what they need to do? Do they know where to go for resources and so on? And then I think there we do need to have a little bit of room for changes, because again, we don't know what some of these projects might be that are adopted under the evacuation goal. Grants, in terms of risk reduction indicators, so we are very fortunate to have the DSI app for this, which will provide data such as the percent of issues that are resolved with the help of grant funding versus other type of mitigation actions. So on any one parcel, the resident after the evaluation is presented with a list of issues that were found by the inspector, and there's different ways for these issues to get resolved. Some of them are resolved seasonally, and there's nothing to do with, it's just what happens as it rains or whatnot. Some of them are resolved by simply the resident takes action and moves that pile of firewood away from the structure, or I don't know, changes the doormats or things like that. Some of them are much more involved and require the support from contractors, and that's when grant funds come in to hopefully financially support the residents. So we'll know how issues at the parcel level get mitigated, whether through grants or through other things. We'll have very fine level, detailed data on that by zone, by agency, by severity risk, by socioeconomic indicators, by whatever it is you wish, essentially. We'll also know what residents are applying for. So this might sound like it's the same thing as the first indicator, but really it isn't. It's looking at what are residents looking for support to accomplish. And that should help us define what our grant programs are funding. It could be that after a year of the initial grant program, we see that there is a need that, so many % of all grant applications are looking at replacing their, what's it called, the eaves. And then we present a program, or we provide a program to the community that just has to do with that only. On the other hand, similar to the VEG goal, we also can provide at any time some project outcome indicators, such as what's the total grant expenditure for the program? How many applications were submitted? How many were abandoned? How many were completed? What's the typical turnaround time, which goes to speak of service level that the community receives? The number of applications that are declined and why. So those are all like indicators that go towards the grant program that is in place, how we're managing it and how it's moving forward. But it's a little bit different from looking at the risk indicators that go towards how the grant program is helping increase our ability to prevent devastations due to a fire coming through. I'll move on to the public outreach and public education and outreach metrics. So like I said, the working group felt that there is the need to conduct what can be referred to as a benchmark attitude and knowledge survey, market type research that we would probably design next year or submit as part of next year's work plan, and then get a first year of data and then repeat it maybe in a year or 2 years later to see how things have changed. And this should provide a lot of information to our public outreach and education consultants, whether Fire Safe Marin or others, or even the in-house member agencies that do conduct a lot of education activities as well, on where it is, what message needs to be sent out, where are there lacks in the knowledge about prevention, and so on. So for those projects, I also recommend that we allow the agencies to provide a narrative of their efforts on what they've done in, or what the projects that they submit for the work plan is proposing in terms of outreach and education. Almost done. Thanks for your patience. Last goal is defensible space and home hardening indicators. So as I mentioned earlier, we will have the CWPP to measure risk score at the parcel level, in the WUI, outside of the WUI, by zone, by agency, by whatever it is we need. But again, that only comes every 4 years. So that is a little bit of a question mark on my side, given that these indicators will need to be available to the public for review. Project outcome indicators, I think we can look at the also data similar to what the grants data will be, meaning changes in the average number of home hardening issues or defensible space issues that are being found. If our education and all our other activities are impactful, residents should start having less and less issues on their parcels. So that's the kind of thing that we can easily measure. And again, anything that comes from DSI will be centralized and won't have to be reported by the projects, the agency that submits the project. So I'll stop there. I know it's a lot of information, but I'm here for any questions.
Any questions from the group? Okay, seeing none. Let's take it out to the public, Mark, see if we've got any questions or comments.
Looking for any raised hands, and I see no raised hands.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the ETC. A lot of work, Charlotte. Looks like you guys have been busy, and want to thank you for putting all that together, and definitely thank everyone who spent their time involved in creating those metrics. It's definitely, the public likes to see the analytics of, I think that's a great way to measure what work is being done and as compared to what's been proposed. So from what I'm understanding is the ask of our group today is to go ahead and approve the objectives and goals that have been created by the ad hoc committee.
The goals are already approved by the boards and we cannot change them. So this is just about approval of the objectives under each goal.
Okay, and so the objectives that were created by this ad hoc committee is what we're bringing forward, that everyone, and the recommendation is for us to approve it, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Before we accept any motion, any comments, questions, concerns about the objectives within the goals?
I'll just echo your thanks, Chief Martin. I got to sit on this committee and I know it was a lot of work and I thought there was a lot of good discussions. And I do think attaching these goals, objectives, metrics, all of it to the projects is going to be really helpful for our own internal use as well as for the public moving forward. So I think it's a great effort.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you to Quinn also for all your time and everything you're doing. With that, can I get a motion to approve the objectives that are before us?
Make a motion that we approve as read.
I'll second that.
So it's a motion by Hilliard and second by Quinn Gardner. Can we go ahead and get a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Bolinas Fire.
Aye, I approve.
County Fire.
Yes.
Town of Ross / Fairfax / Sleepy Hollow / whoever you want to be, Rob. Was that an aye? Okay, thank you. Stinson Beach Fire.
Aye.
Novato Fire.
Aye.
Mill Valley, Southern Marin.
Aye.
Kentfield.
Aye.
Muir Beach.
Aye.
Corte Madera.
Aye.
San Rafael / Marinwood.
Aye.
And rounding it up with Larkspur.
Aye.
We have all in favor.
The motion passes. Thank you, everyone. And once again, like I said, it's like as Mark is always reiterated, the strength of this group is by its each member agency and also the dedication of all the members that volunteer to join these smaller ad hoc committees for doing the heavy lift. So thank you, everyone. So moving on, I believe committee members' requests for any future agenda items. One agenda item that I have that I wrote down is to discuss the CEQA duplicity or regarding the environmental compliancy, to see if we can discuss if some of the land managers already have, for example, a VTP in place. Do we then have to duplicate it with another sequence? So if we can add that to the future agenda, that'd be wonderful. Anyone else? Jordan?
I have a quick question. I don't know if this can, with the appropriate platform for it, but just with the group that's on here, as far as we're starting to develop projects into the future. And I think this is for the MWPA staff there, just on a compliance question. I know these past year that MWPA was kind of the lead for doing the core compliance for the core projects. Are they going to also take over with the local projects as well? Just as we're planning out our budgets in time, should we plan on doing the local projects, the compliance ourselves, or will that be in the hands of the MWPA?
I will, Ann or Mark, if you guys can answer that question.
Go for it, Ann.
Our plan is to continue providing compliance for the core projects, but not the local projects. But that's always something on a project by project basis that we can discuss support for.
Okay, thank you.
Anything for future agenda items? Seeing none, that takes us to the end of our meeting. Thank you, everyone, for spending time in your afternoon for joining us. And do we need a motion to adjourn?
No.
Okay. With that said, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. If we don't see you before then, happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Thank you to everyone who worked on the objectives and metrics and everything else. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you.
Take care, everybody.